Hello, today we're going to be talking about the scientific method. The scientific method is so important. You've already done this before. You've already had many science classes, physics, chemistry, your classes in middle school. We're going to be focusing in on the scientific method and the process of science within biology. So there are two main approaches to learn about the science of biology. There is the discovery science and there is the hypothesis-based science. Both of these processes deal with a type of reasoning. We have one type of reasoning called inductive reasoning. That is when we have a very specific observation and it leads to a very broader conclusion. Deductive reasoning is very general in their observation and it goes to a very specific conclusion. So discovery science is going to be using inductive reasoning, where the hypothesis-based science is going to be using the deductive reasoning. So first, let's talk about discovery science. This is where scientists are going to describe something, and they're going to use inductive reasoning. And again, inductive reasoning is a specific observation that leads to a broader, more general conclusion. An example of this would be sequencing the human genome. Okay, a couple of years ago, scientists sat down from all over the world and they wanted to figure out what every gene, every base sequence in our body and what it did. And again, we will talk a little bit more about the human genome sequencing later when we talk about the DNA unit. But again, discovery science describes something using inductive reasoning. Hypothesis-based science is obviously going to deal with something with hypotheses, and I will define that in a couple seconds. This is going to use deductive reasoning. And again, deductive reasoning is going something very general to very specific. Okay, so an example would be if all organisms are made up of cells and humans are organisms, then humans are composed of cells. Okay, so more specifically, hypothesis-based science is going to deal with observations, asking questions, making hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, and it does lead to deductive reasoning, going from general to very specific. So let's focus in on what a hypothesis is. A hypothesis is a question or statement that's testable through experimentation and observation. In our class, in our biology class, you need to use an if-then format. This is so important. An if-then format is where I am very particular on. So if you do not have your hypothesis in an if-then format, you will get that part wrong. An example would be, if I study for a test, then I will get a good grade. Hypotheses are preliminary explanations to problems. Okay, they can be changed. They're not set in stone. Okay, so that's one thing. As you're going through your experiments, you will constantly change your hypothesis. Please remember to put it in the if-then format. Okay, so we have some steps of the scientific method. Okay, before I get into the actual steps, I want to just point out that the scientific method is very important for other scientists to be successful. Scientists do need to collaborate, they need to share info, and they build upon other work. Just to kind of give you an example of this, back in 1928, Alexander Fleming kind of found by accident penicillin was killing his plates of bacteria that he was working on. He actually took the mold out, he put it on other plates, and he was seeing what was happening. However, he was having a little bit of trouble purifying it, and the scientific community was ignoring this. Well, the word got out. More people started to actually experiment on penicillin, and they started to purify the samples. They added new techniques that we're building upon, adding in science. And then 1941, they tested it on a human in England. Okay, so it wasn't until 1945 that Fleming, Florey, and Chain were awarded the Nobel Prize for purifying the first antibiotic of penicillin. Again, this was collaborating, sharing info, and building upon other work. So, the steps of the scientific method. First step is to observe. We're going to be observing something. Okay? The next step is to define a problem or a question. Okay? Next step is forming a hypothesis, again in the if-then format. Then you're going to test your hypothesis with a controlled experiment. Then you're going to be collecting data, so you're going to be absorbing and recording results. You will then form a conclusion by confirming or modifying the hypothesis. And then you will report your results. So just to kind of review these steps, okay, we're going to observe. So I'm observing that as a student, I have notes and I have a textbook, and I'm thinking, I'm wondering, I'm going to define a problem or ask a question. I'm wondering if I read this over, if I'm going to do better. So I make a hypothesis. If I read through my notes and study my textbook and study my notes, then I will be successful in this unit. So I actually go and test it. I read through my notes and go through all that, and then I take my assessment or I follow through with my assignments, and then I realize, oh yeah, I am. Okay? So then you could form that conclusion. I studied, I'm going to be successful. And then you could report your results to, let's say, your teacher or your parents or your friends. Let's just say you did all that studying and you did worse. All right, well then you'd have to go back and kind of reevaluate your hypothesis and reform that hypothesis. So the scientific method is a work in progress. You always start off with an observation and then you ask some type of a question or define a problem. You make your hypothesis in the if-then format. You test it with an experiment, and we'll talk more about experiments tomorrow. Observe your results from that experiment. You kind of make a conclusion, and then you report your results. Okay? Just a little example that's in your book. This poor woman is noticing, I turn on my flashlight, it's not working. So she asks a question, let's see. I don't know why my flashlight's not working. So there's two hypotheses that she forms. One is the batteries are dead. So if I replace the batteries, then I will fix the problem. So you test it. Did it work? Well, in this case, it didn't work. So that meant the test falsifies the hypothesis. The hypothesis wasn't correct. So she goes back and she makes another hypothesis. Now, at this point, I would throw out the flashlight myself, but this lady was very determined. She said, I think it's the bulb. So if I replace the bulb, then I will fix the problem. So she does. She tests it, and it works. Okay? So just one last thing when we talk about a theory. A theory is going to be explaining current observations and predicting new observations. Pretty much started out with a hypothesis, and it was tested and more testing and more testing. So pretty much these theories, like the theory of evolution, the Big Bang Theory, theories that we'll be talking about, were thought of as a thought way back when, and then there were experiments that keep saying, yes, this is true. Okay, will it ever be found wrong? Well, maybe. It really depends on the experimentation and the results. If you have any questions, please see me tomorrow. Thanks.